What we normally do in these sort of meetings is we'll let the two speakers speak first, and then if there's any questions or contributions from the floor, if we save that till after they finish speaking. So what I'll do, I'll introduce Andy Bentley to my left here, who's the Trade Union Socialist Coalition candidate for Mayor. So let him go on with this.
Thanks, Matt. Although this is not a massively attended meeting, I think it's extremely important because it's one of many which are taking place, not necessarily tonight, but over the previous weeks and the weeks ahead, all around the country to prepare TUSC candidates to stand in the local elections which are coming up. Yes, there's an economic crisis and there's a debt crisis, but the reality is that big business and top bankers and successive governments who have created the crisis are trying to make ordinary working class people pay in loss of public services, loss of wages, loss of benefits, in all sorts of ways for that crisis which they've created. And we in TUSC are not prepared to sit back and allow that to take place. And as well as that, there's also, I would argue, an ideological offensive, because the gains which were won on the basis of struggle, I might add, after the Second World War, in terms of the welfare state, in terms of the nationalisations of various industries, in terms of decent pensions, the NHS in particular, were all significant gains for the working class in Britain at that particular time.
I'll introduce Sanara from Coventry branch now. She's, like I say, from Coventry. In Coventry we've got Dave Nallist, who some of you might remember as a Labour MP, who was one of the very few Labour MPs who took the average worker's wage instead of the full MP's wage. In the past they've had a couple of councillors there, and Dave Nallist is still a councillor there at the moment. So without further ado, I'll introduce Sanara.
Thanks very much for having me here today. I only was asked in the morning to speak today, so if I'm a bit sort of like rough around the edges, I do apologise. It's great to be invited to speak and to let you discuss and talk about the election campaign in Coventry and the Socialist Party's influence in the city. I would just like to start off by first sort of like going into a bit of the background in the city. I mean, originally we were in the Labour Party, as many people know, but with the Labour Party having gone so far to the right, you know, rather than representing ordinary working people and the trade unions, we split from the Labour Party. There's various reasons and a lot of history behind it. But Dave Nallist was one of the main casualties of that, and one of the main people which hunted out of the Labour Party. And one of the main reasons was the fact that he did take a worker's wage, and it was done very scientifically as well, because they went around 5 different car factories that he was representing in the area that he was representing, and they worked out the average wage from the 5 different car factories. So it was done very scientifically. It's not just a thing that they plucked out of the air and said, oh, we'll take a worker's wage, and that was it. The key thing is that regardless of whether or not you have public representatives that do get elected, the process of actually being in elections, it gives you a huge opportunity to reach out to the working communities in the areas, to build their confidence, so they know that there's an organisation and there are people who are fighting on their behalf, and people that are welcoming them and encouraging them to join the fight back as well. I think that's hugely important, and it does boost their confidence to fight back. And sort of like whenever there's been sort of like protests or picket lines and things like that, having public representatives or standing in elections and people know that they've got people fighting on their behalf has actually meant that they've had more confidence to be on the picket line, because they've got Socialist Party councillors standing alongside them.
Thanks, Sanara. Did a brilliant job considering you only had a couple of hours' notice that you're going to speak. What I'll do, I'll open the floor to any questions or contributions. If you just raise your hands, there's quite a few of us here. Just raise your hand and I'll let you in to speak.
Obviously, Labour Party are complicit in the cuts and responsible for a lot of them. So, I'd like to join actually the Socialist Party. I was a Labour Party member years ago, but I left for a completely separate reason. And to be honest, until you kind of sort of gain a bit of prominence in the Sentinel and stuff like that, there's no other political party I would join, and I'm sure there's a lot of ex-Labour Party members in this city who would also be willing like join. It's just identifying them, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think the city's absolutely full of ex-Labour Party members.
Pete Rowe from the PCS, I'm the branch secretary from North Staffordshire. Yeah, clearly there has been a lack of momentum after the march from the TUC. However, our General Secretary, Mark Sawatka, is in there with the TUC all the time, with Brendan Barber and all the affiliated Labour people as well, to try and get some action actually going. And from what we understand, PCS anyway will be balloting, hopefully after our conference, our members for a national strike, as Andy says. Obviously it's got to be endorsed by our conference, and at the same time we are hopeful that the NUT, NASUWT as well will also be balloting for strike action. I'm just slightly worried about splitting the left vote and letting the BNP in as well. I'm just wondering as well whether TUSC are actually working with people like UAF, Hope Not Hate, and people like that to defeat the BNP in these areas as well.
Where you put forward genuine socialist policies, then you cut across the vote for the BNP. And it's true, we would take votes off Labour, but we also take them off the BNP. Now, some people might hold their hands up in horror, those people who think all people who vote BNP are Hitler or fascists, but they ain't. That's the question. A lot of them, the overwhelming majority, and this is based on concrete experience, Matt will bear me out with this, where we've knocked on the doors of people in the Abbey time and time again. We've spoke to people who, when we first spoke to them, were going to vote BNP. We spoke to one fellow who got a BNP poster and he said he went in. Having spoke to him for about 10 minutes, he took the poster down and put our poster in. There was somebody else who was going to vote for the BNP who ended up joining the Socialist Party. And I think this is important because for me, that's the way you defeat the BNP. It's not by saying, well, Labour's struggling here. If we don't stand, they might get another 12 votes and beat the BNP, because you can't guarantee that either. I'll just finish on this point. I mean, Pete mentioned the need for strike action in his personal capacity to bring the government to its knees, and that's dead right. We do need to bring the government to its knees, but I think that poses point blank in a sense that what comes after. Because if we get rid of the Tory government next week, 6 months, 12 months, what comes after? We don't want a Labour government which is going to do what it did in the last 13 years. I stress again, in a period of the most prolonged economic growth that Britain's seen certainly since the Second World War, and probably if you go back even further, during that period they introduced tuition fees when they said they wouldn't. They refused to repeal the anti-trade union laws. In fact, they are tighter now than they were before. They presided over a growth in the difference between rich and poor, which is greater when they left power than when they started. They presided over an increased casualisation of labour. They took us into 2 wars. Need I go on? That was in a period of economic growth. If the Labour government, the Labour Party comes back into power now, and it's entirely possible by the end of this year this government could be gone, and you've got a Labour government coming back. What are they going to do? They've got to carry out the same cuts, basically. So yeah, Pete's right, but I would add something to it. And that's why, again, the standing of TUSC candidates is extremely important. As I said before, it's a step towards a new party, which we need. A new party that represents the working class, not in the way that Labour well, they don't even say, I was going to say they represent the working class. We don't even bother with that anymore, do they? They don't even say that anymore. We need to develop that party. In other words, we need a political wing to the industrial wing of the working class in Britain to be able to fight on the industrial front, but also the political front. And we need that party to have a programme of genuine socialist change. Because if we don't, we'll be fighting these battles. When my grandkids have got grandkids, we'll always be fighting these battles. If my grandkids ever have grandkids, I don't know. But we'll always be fighting these battles, won't we? Unless we link it to fundamental change in society, then what's the point, I would say? You know what I mean? So we need to raise those socialist demands within a new Workers' Party, which I think will inevitably develop. I think we're on a line towards that, and there's no going back now. Because Labour's gone down the pan, basically. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy.